Translation and about literature. I had just translated something that required me to look in the dictionary for mellow, and I was looking for. I had looked like a couple of weeks before I met with him, so I had like in my head I knew the definitions that were in the dictionary for mellow, but of course I did not want to say anything because I thought, you know, he's going to think I'm like I have the dictionary memorized or something. So I didn't say anything at the moment, knowing how some writers have egos and you have to be careful. But I sent him a fax because we continued corresponding by fax because Javier Marias likes to correspond by fax. It's very odd. Yes, he has a fax machine and you have to send him faxes. So we were sending faxes like all summer long, and finally I said, okay, I think it's now a good time I can tell him about that mellow, you know. And what it is, I told him, this is my theory. I told him, in mellow in the dictionary, they talk about mellow yellow. Does anybody remember mellow yellow? It's the pulp of a banana, the inside of the banana peel, where it's, you know, all the pulp is. So I said, I bet you got that from mellow yellow. And he just kind of was a little bit floored. And he said, you know, I think you're right, actually. So we figured out where he got his luna pulposa. It took a while, but we figured out. But so I'll read just a little bit of his response to the question, what are your best pages? And then I'll read a little paragraph from that. So you can just get a feel for how the thing works. And this is Javier Marias in the original English. Okay, this is how he speaks in English. I think that many authors, or maybe not so many, but quite a few of them, and I suppose that I could include myself among them, write novels or realize that we have written a certain novel to include a few paragraphs, or even sometimes only a few sentences, one that by themselves would not stand up properly. And sometimes they might be slightly ridiculous, and they might need another form. Maybe it could be a poem, but then a poem is quite a different thing from prose, although of course you can have some poetry in the prose, and certainly my prose tries to be rather rhythmical and rather musical prose, and certainly my prose rather musical, and I think I have a strong sense of pace, but certainly sometimes there are a few things that you cannot say just by themselves. It's not something you're absolutely aware of in the beginning, but sometimes you feel it once you have finished a book. In a way, you've built a whole architecture, a whole building, just to encompass a few pages, or 1 page, or 5 pages, or what I usually call, in my own novels, some lyrical excerpts that you can find now and then, here and there, what in French is called a morceau de bravoure. You have the feeling that the main thing, the very reason for the existence of a particular novel, is that 1 page, or those 5 or 10 pages, or this paragraph and that one, this idea and that one, in the sense it is not that you're exactly cheating your writer, and as I said before, you build a rather complex architecture in order to shelter a few sentences or a few pages. It's not exactly that. It's not that you do that on purpose. Of course, you want to tell a story. You do tell it, but there's some moment in which you realize that some fragments or some paragraphs are stronger than the rest somehow, and you feel them that way. And the reason why I have chosen these fragments has to do with that. I realize that I might have chosen others because I think that in most of my novels, or at least in the most recent ones, and by recent ones I mean the ones I've written since 1983 or 86 perhaps, beginning with El Hombre Sentimental, I think that all of them have, in some way or another, these kinds of salient paragraphs or outstanding ones. Okay, so that's what, it's much longer than that, but that leads into to this. Sorry. Okay, so this is one of those paragraphs that he's talking about that have like a little lyrical zing. And it's from The Man of Feeling. When you die, I will truly mourn you. I will approach your transfigured face to plant desperate kisses on your lips in one last effort, full of arrogance and faith, to return you to the world that has rendered you redundant. I will feel that my own life bears a wound and will consider my own history to have split in two by that final, definitive moment of yours. I will tenderly close your surprised, reluctant eyes, and I will watch over your white, mutant body all through the night and into the pointless dawn that will never have known you. I will remove your pillow and the damp sheets. Incapable of conceiving of life without your daily presence and seeing you lying there, lifeless, I will want to rush headlong after you. I will visit your tomb, and alone in the cemetery, having climbed up the steep hill and having looked at you lovingly, wearily, through the inscribed stone, I will talk to you. I will see my own death foretold in yours. I will look at my own photo, and recognizing myself in your stiff features, I will cease to believe in the reality of your extinction because it gives body and credibility to my own. For no one is capable of imagining his own death. Okay, so I'll read that paragraph in Spanish, just so you can hear a little bit. El hombre sentimental. Cuando mueras, yo te lloraré de veras. Yo me acercaré hasta tu rostro transfigurado para besarte con desesperación los labios en un último esfuerzo, lleno de presunción y de fe, por devolverte al mundo que te habrá relegado. Yo me sentiré herido en mi propia vida y consideraré mi historia partida en dos por ese momento tuyo definitivo. Yo cerraré tus reacios y sorprendidos ojos con mano amiga y velaré tu cadáver emblanquecido y mutante durante toda la noche y la inútil aurora que no te habrá conocido. Yo retiraré tu almohada, yo tus sábanas humedecidas, yo, incapaz de concebir la existencia sin tu presencia diaria, querré seguir sin dilación tus pasos al contemplarte exánime. Yo iré a visitar tu tumba y te hablaré sin testigos en lo alto del cementerio tras haber ascendido por la pendiente y haberte mirado con amor y fatiga a través de la piedra inscrita. Yo veré anticipada en la tuya mi propia muerte. Yo veré mi retrato y entonces, al reconocerme en tus facciones rígidas, dejaré de creer en la autenticidad de tu expiración por dar este cuerpo y verosimilitud a la mía, pues nadie está capacitado para imaginarse la muerte propia. So that's Javier Marias. Now what I did was ask the question about their best pages, then a second question, who are your departed? And then the third question was like a coda, something that I could see, you know, when they were talking about their own work and kind of continue a conversation with them. Some people took that conversation very far and others less. But when I asked the question about the departed, all of these writers know perfectly well the Quevedo sonnet, and many of them just answered according to their classic writers. But Carlos Fuentes answered in a very funny way, and he talked about his grandmothers. And one of the funny thing is that so did Antonio Muñoz Molina, and so did other writers. And all of a sudden you have the grandmothers, like the importance of the grandmothers, you know. So I thought I'll read just so that I can read for you a little part of that about Carlos Fuentes' grandmothers and the importance that they had for him. And then after I read, you know, maybe we can just open for questions if you'd like. The good thing is that with the conversation, you know, among the departed, it kind of goes both ways, because it's a conversation like I said, I want this to kind of be a freeze frame or a portrait of a period of time, you know. And as the writers pass away, because I interviewed, like the oldest one is Aurora Venturini, and she's, I don't remember exactly what age, but she's like 90. And so it's obvious that, you know, just time will not let them be with us. But the conversation is going from them this way to their departed to kind of a conversation that's lateral. Now it's become, there's a number of them that are departed that are still talking to themselves and talking to us through their conversation that they're having with themselves. But so here it is. Because Fuentes also, since he knew the original, and Faulkner and a couple of the others answered like very quickly. Others answered long passages. It was very funny in the original. William Saroyan, for example, he answered. I guess William Saroyan was a little bit of an enfant terrible, and he used to talk about his own work, and he never cared about anybody else's work. So his response was, of course I'll tell you what is my best pages. It's my own work. I'm never interested in reading anyone else's. And then Dorothy Parker, when she's asked, she responds saying, well, you know, nobody else has really talked about this, so I guess I should anyway. It's hard to decide those kind of things because on the one hand, it seems like you're doing self-promotion, and on the other hand, it sounds like you're Saroyan. So she was saying, I don't want to sound like Saroyan tooting my own horn. But anyway. So he answered with this kind of very short sentence that says, I selected these fragments from Terra Nostra because they have the unfortunate habit of summarizing my approach to storytelling. And that's it. But it's really interesting because Terra Nostra is actually one of the, this was kind of the fun of the anthology. Terra Nostra is one of the books that the critics never really understood, and they didn't give a good criticism, good reviews or criticism to that book. But after he's died, actually a number of them, Gonzalo Celorio, a number of people have been talking about Terra Nostra, about like we didn't give it a chance when it came out, we didn't understand how important it was for him, and that's what he selected. So it's kind of interesting to see that happen. He says, when I ask him, who are your departed, he says, my dead are all the ancestors I remember, very few, and all of those I'm unable to recall, the immensity. I am who I am thanks to them, but in particular, I cite my grandmothers. I will tell you why. When I was 4, I arrived in Washington, D.C., and went to public school, and my parents demanded that every summer I go back to Mexico to stay with my grandmothers so that I wouldn't forget Spanish. So I owe the Spanish language to my grannies. One was from Veracruz, the other was from Sonora, two extremes of Mexico and with very different personalities. My father's mother was German. She was very strict and very disciplined. Her husband became paralyzed, and she set up a boarding house, and every Sunday we would go to a pyramid. She collected pyramids, so it was essential for my education. We went to the pyramids again and again, and there are lots of pyramids in Mexico. She had a wonderful, severe personality. She didn't do jokes or anything of the sort. I revered her as I did my other grandmother, who brought up her 3 daughters by becoming the cake-making teacher after her husband died. This great reposteria. And then her old friend Alvaro Obregón became president of Mexico. He had delivered milk to her when he was a little boy, and she asked him for a post in the Ministry of Education, which was headed by the great Vasconcelos. So she became a school teacher. And then she married off her 3 daughters, and she was hell for her son-in-laws, whom she bailed out and corrected. One of them was a general, and she said, "You've only had battles with me, General, and you've lost them all." And to the others, she would say, "Didn't they teach you manners at home?" She got along very well with my father, but she was like a bird that pecked at the greatness of the other men. But her daughters loved her as did her grandchildren. We were very close to her. She came from the north of Mexico, the mining town of Alamos and Mazatlan, the poet's city, and had millions of memories, and she made me read. She made me read Esa de Queiroz. When I went from childhood reading to adult reading, she was with me. My other grandmother gave me books for children that were horrifying. They were all about murders and mutilations and abductions. They were called Las Tardes de la Granja, and an old man called Palemon sat with children and told them these horrifying stories. So you see, these are two very important influences in my life, apart from many others, but I would like to choose these two. The grannies always stay with you, and later you go to Faulkner. So anyway, so that's the anthology, and I don't know if you have any questions or if you'd like me to read any more or whatever you'd like.
Were the pieces translated for this anthology?
No, some of them were already translated. So we put together the ones that weren't translated, and they were translated specifically. I did Antonio Muñoz Molina, and I did Enrique Villamatas, and the full story of Enrique Villamatas will be coming out as a pearl in New Directions next year sometime. And he's going to be publishing, next year's a big year in English for Enrique Villamatas. He has 2 other novels that are going to be coming out in New Direction. So, but then there's others like Margaret Jewel Costa is Maria's translator, and I think those are her translations. Esther Allen translated, other ones. So we chose the ones that were like the canonical translations, and then added new ones.
What criteria or what motivations did you have to select those specific authors?
Mm-hmm. Good question. Well, they had to be alive, obviously. That was one. I was looking for the writers who were canonical in a way, that they were read in schools or they won the important prizes. I mean, I went down the list of Cervantes prizes, I went national prizes, people who were in the academies. So I kind of cross-sectioned a lot of the traditional things. But then I also went off route a little bit in that sense and looked for the ones, like I said, who are considered important writers by important people. For example, José de la Colina. José de la Colina didn't win a number of prizes, and he's actually known much more as being a journalist than as being a writer. But Octavio Paz, on numerous occasions, said that he has the best prose in Spanish. So what he has is the style called prosa madrepórica, which is like a coral reef, and he uses kind of almost a Jamesian way of writing very long sentences without one single syllable missing, but like a whole story is one sentence. So it's a very, very particular prose style that many of the great writers admired. But he was also, he's a Spaniard his parents were Republican. He went to Mexico in exile. He was kind of taken out of his element, and so he never won the prizes. And also, sometimes especially in those periods of time, it's like if you're a journalist, you're a journalist, and you can't do something else. I remember I did for the Paris Review, I did in the Paris Review art of fiction interview with Camilo José Cela, and Cela complained a lot about this, about how El Pintor Sorolla, for example, how he because he was a painter, nobody read his writing, and yet he considered him one of the greatest writers in Spain. So there's a lot of that happens also. Aurora Venturini is another one who was exiled, but Aurora Venturini, she's amazing. And if you read this, I don't read it out loud because it's so perverse, and yet she's 90. She's 90 years old, and she's got the most incredible twisted mind. But Borges gave her a prize. I think it was in the 40s or something. And her first prize was given by Borges. And then she had to go into exile because she was very close to Evita Perón. So she went into exile and didn't come back. like, I think 40 years later. And in the meantime, she wrote a lot, and she translated a lot, and she did special things on Villon and on a lot of French writers. But when she came